The Man in Lower 10, Mary Roberts Rinehart. Chapter 4, Numbers 7 and 9. Afterwards, when I tried to recall our discovery of the body in Lower 10, I found that my most vivid impression was not that made by the revelation of the opened curtain. I had an instantaneous picture of a slender, blue-gowned girl who seemed to sense my words rather than hear them, of two small hands that clutched desperately at the seat beside them. The girl in the aisle stood, bent toward us, perplexity and alarm fighting in her face. And with twitching hands, the porter attempted to draw the curtains together. Then, in a paralysis of shock, he collapsed on the edge of my berth and sat there swaying. In my excitement, I shook him. "For heaven's sake, keep your nerve, man," I said brusquely. "You'll have every woman in the car in hysterics, and if you do, you'll wish you could change places with the man in there." He rolled his eyes. A man near, who had been reading last night's paper, dropped it quickly and tiptoed toward us. He peered between the partly open curtains, closed them quietly, and went back, ostentatiously solemn, to his seat. The very crackle with which he opened his paper added to the bursting curiosity of the car, for the passengers knew that something was amiss. I was conscious of a sudden tension. With the curtains closed, the porter was more himself. He wiped his lips with a handkerchief and stood erect. "It's my last trip in this car," he remarked heavily. "There's something wrong with that berth. Last trip the woman in it took an overdose of some sleeping stuff, and we found her, just like that, dead. And it ain't more'n 3 months now since there was twins born in that very spot. No, sir, it ain't natural." At that moment, a thin man with prominent eyes and a spare, greyish goatee creaked up the aisle and paused beside me. "Porter sick?" he inquired, taking in with a professional eye the porter's horror-struck face, my own excitement, and the slightly gaping curtains of Lower 10. He reached for the darkie's pulse and pulled out an old-fashioned gold watch. Only 50. What's the matter? Had a shock?" he asked shrewdly. "Yes," I answered for the porter. "We've both had one. If you are a doctor, I wish you would look at the man in the berth across Lower 10. I'm afraid it's too late, but I'm not experienced in such matters." Together, we opened the curtains, and the doctor, bending down, gave a comprehensive glance that took in the rolling head, the relaxed jaw, the ugly stain on the sheet. The examination needed only a moment. Death was written in the clear white of the nostrils, the colourless lips, the smoothing away of the sinister lines of the night before. With its new dignity, the face was not unhandsome. The grey hair was still plentiful, the features strong and well cut. The doctor straightened himself and turned to me. "Dead for some time," he said, running a professional finger over the stains. "These are dry and darkened, you see, and rigor mortis is well established. A friend of yours?" "I don't know him at all," I replied. "Never saw him but once before." "Then you don't know if he is travelling alone?" "No, he was not. That is, I don't know anything about him," I corrected myself. It was my first blunder. The doctor glanced up at me quickly and then turned his attention again to the body. Like a flash, there had come to me the vision of the woman with the bronze hair and the tragic face, whom I had surprised in the vestibule between the cars, somewhere in the small hours of the morning. I had acted on my first impulse, the masculine one of shielding a woman. The doctor had unfastened the coat of the striped pajamas and exposed the dead man's chest. On the left side was a small punctured wound of insignificant size. "Very neatly done," the doctor said with appreciation. "Couldn't have done it better myself. Right through the intercostal space, no time even to grunt." "Isn't the heart around there somewhere?" I asked. The medical man turned toward me and smiled austerely. "That's where it belongs, just under that puncture, when it isn't gadding around in a man's throat or his boots." I had a new respect for the doctor, For anyone indeed who could crack even a feeble joke under such circumstances, or who could run an impersonal finger over that wound and those stains. Odd how a healthy, normal man holds the medical profession in half-contemptuous regard until he gets sick or an emergency like this arises, and then turns meekly to the man who knows the ins and outs of his mortal tenement, takes his pills or his patronage, ties to him like a rudderless ship in a gale. "Suicide, is it, doctor?" I asked. He stood erect, after drawing the bedclothing over the face, and taking off his glasses, he wiped them slowly. "No, it is not suicide," he announced decisively. "It is murder." Of course, I had expected that, but the word itself brought a shiver. I was just a bit dizzy. Curious faces through the car were turned toward us, and I could hear the porter behind me breathing audibly. A stout woman in negligee came down the aisle and querulously confronted the porter. She wore a pink dressing jacket and carried portions of her clothing. "Porter," she began, in the voice of the lady who had dangled, "is there a rule of this company that will allow a woman to occupy the dressing room for 1 hour and curl her hair with an alcohol lamp while respectable people haven't a place where they can hook their—" She stopped suddenly and stared into lower 10. Her shining pink cheeks grew pasty. Her jaw fell. I remember trying to think of something to say, and of saying nothing at all. Then she had buried her eyes in the nondescript garments that hung from her arm and tottered back the way she had come. Slowly, a little knot of men gathered around us, silent for the most part. The doctor was making a search of the berth when the conductor elbowed his way through, followed by the inquisitive man who had evidently summoned him. I had lost sight for a time of the girl in blue. "Do it himself?" the conductor queried, after a businesslike glance at the body. "No, he didn't," the doctor asserted. "There's no weapon here, and the window is closed. He couldn't have thrown it out, and he didn't swallow it. What on earth are you looking for, man?" Someone was on the floor at our feet, face down, head peering under the berth. Now he got up without apology, revealing the man who had summoned the conductor. He was dusty, alert, cheerful, and he dragged up with him the dead man's suitcase. The sight of it brought back to me at once my own predicament. "I don't know whether there's any connection or not, conductor," I said, "but I am a victim too, in less degree. I've been robbed of everything I possess, except a red and yellow bathrobe. I happened to be wearing the bathrobe, which was probably the reason the thief overlooked it." There was a fresh murmur in the crowd. Somebody laughed nervously. The conductor was irritated. "I can't bother with that now," he snarled. "The railroad company is responsible for transportation, not for clothes, jewelry, and morals. If people want to be stabbed and robbed in the company's cars, it's their affair. Why didn't you sleep in your clothes? I do." I took an angry step forward. Then somebody touched my arm, and I unclenched my fist. I could understand the conductor's position, and beside, in the law, I had been guilty myself of contributory negligence. "I'm not trying to make you responsible," I protested as amiably as I could, "and I believe the clothes the thief left are as good as my own. They are certainly newer. But my valise contained valuable papers, and it is to your interest as well as mine to find the man who stole it." "Why, of course," the conductor said shrewdly. "Find the man who skipped out with this gentleman's clothes, and you've probably got the murderer." "I went to bed in lower 9, I said, my mind full again of my lost papers, and I wakened in number 7. I was up in the night prowling around, as I was unable to sleep, and I must have gone back to the wrong berth. Anyhow, until the porter wakened me this morning, I knew nothing of my mistake. In the interval, the thief, murderer too perhaps, must have come back, discovered my error, and taken advantage of it to further his escape." The inquisitive man looked at me from between narrowed eyelids, ferret-like. "Did anyone on the train suspect you of having valuable papers?" he inquired. The crowd was listening intently. No one, I answered promptly and positively. The doctor was investigating the murdered man's effects. The pockets of his trousers contained the usual miscellany of keys and small change, while in his hip pocket was found a small, pearl-handled revolver of the type women usually keep around. A gold watch with a Masonic charm had slid down between the mattress and the window, while a showy diamond stud was still fastened in the bosom of his shirt. Taken as a whole, the personal belongings were those of a man of some means, but without any particular degree of breeding. The doctor heaped them together. Either robbery was not the motive, he reflected, or the thief overlooked these things in his hurry. The latter hypothesis seemed the more tenable when, after a thorough search, we found no pocketbook and less than $1 in small change. The suitcase gave no clue. It contained one empty leather-covered flask and a pint bottle, also empty, a change of linen, and some collars with the laundry mark, Scheich. In the leather tag on the handle was a card with the name Simon Harrington, Pittsburgh. The conductor sat down on my unmade berth, across, and made an entry of the name and address. Then, on an old envelope, he wrote a few words and gave it to the porter, who disappeared. "I guess that's all I can do," he said. "I've had enough trouble this trip to last for a year. They don't need a conductor on these trains anymore. What they ought to have is a sheriff and a posse." The porter from the next car came in and whispered to him. The conductor rose unhappily. "Next car's caught the disease," he grumbled. "Doctor, a woman back there has got mumps or bubonic plague or something. Will you come back?" The strange porter stood aside. "Lady about the middle of the car," he said. "In black, sir, with queer-looking hair. Sort of copper color, I think, sir."